series rooted in our values. And for me, as a former Montessori teacher and administrator, that really comes into Montessori education. This pedagogy of freedom, liberating the full human potential, where we believe that every child deserves an affirming, loving education where they see themselves as the protagonist of their own life story, where we believe every person deserves to be treated with dignity, where we believe that we can break outside of the boxes that try to contain us. And we know that we all have a role and responsibility to play in preparing our larger societal prepared environment. So that begs the question of, does being Montessori mean being anti-racist? Drop in the chat. What do you think? Does being Montessori mean being anti-racist? I think we would like to think so, right? As people who care about these values and who have chosen Montessori pedagogy, we want to think so. But we know that racist incidents are still happening in Montessori schools by Montessori educators, because we are not neutral, identity-less guides. We're human beings that have been all miseducated about race. We have deep-seated assumptions, bias, and prejudice. And the good news, right, the hopeful news here is that we can get equipped to address it. And that's what we're going to do today in this webinar. I'm so excited to introduce our illustrious panel of Montessori leaders and kick off this rich conversation. But before we dive in, I want you all to know that we have a national wireless emergency alert system test that is going to go off on your cell phone at 20 minutes past the hour. So if you don't want to be interrupted, you can turn off your phone, or just know in advance that this is a practice to become more connected, and that we as a country have this alert coming up soon and no action is required. All right. So without further ado, I'm excited to invite our panel to the stage. Hi, hello everyone. Thank you for being here. Easy, I'm glad we can see you. Yay, thank you. And I'm going to drop in here the links to everybody's LinkedIn so you can see their the bios and profiles of everybody in this panel. But I want to really just start by diving into the conversation and ask each featured speaker why you chose Montessori. What brought you into the Montessori pedagogy, and why do you believe that it holds so much promise in social justice, anti-racism work? Nicole, do you want to kick us off?
I will. Hi, everybody. Good to see. Well, to see the names of some folks we know and some new folks to the conversation. So, hello. Montessori for me came later in my educational career. I had been a teacher. I had been an administrator, and then I happened upon. Let me say this: it was a page in my teacher training, right, that I learned about Montessori. But the point for me is when I stepped into a Montessori classroom, and one of the reasons why I stepped into a Montessori classroom building is because I was looking for something different. I honestly was looking for something that honored some of the needs of Black children. I have been in traditional schools where Black children and their ways of being was being squelched.
Mm-hmm.
You can't move around. You can't policing of bodies and knowledge and all of that was happening everywhere traditionally, right? And we as a community have begun to push back on it, but I said there has to be a place and a space where this is begin where the seeds are beginning or planted and we're beginning to sprout. And for me, that Montessori classroom and environment was a place where I saw some seeds that were being planted. I'll save more for later. Because
Yeah,
again,
thank you.
seeds were being planted. I want to be really specific about that.
Yeah. You want to pass it around?
I'll pass it up a popcorn into corn.
Hey everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you for the question, Daisy. I was an educator, having really educated in homeschooled, educating in Oakland, which is like home of the Black Panthers, educating in Central Black Intelligence schools, with the recognition that these schools were dangerous for our psychological development, that there was a way in which we were educated outside of ourselves. And I'll never forget and it moved all the way through to college. I'll never forget my college professor saying, UC Berkeley, if you don't actively seek your education, you're going to leave here thinking and acting like a white man. So,
Mm,
Mm-hmm.
what
mm,
does it mean, right, to start early with children to actually create self-salience? And in the schools that I was teaching, I didn't see that happening. And so I recognized that children needed opportunity to connect to themselves, to each other, to the environment, to really heal, to have a place to self-soothe. And I had already actually started my own homeschool with all these principles when I was walking the kids to a local museum and picked up a book, Maria Montessori, and said, wait, so there's a way in which people are actually integrating the healing arts, in which the teacher is supposed to be, doing kind of this spiritual preparation work. Montessori might work, so I gave it a try.
Awesome. Thank you. Carly, do you want to share?
Sure, I'd love to. Thank you. So, Carly Riley, she, her, really excited to be here with this amazing panel. And I got my start in Montessori. I actually went to school to get a degree in early childhood education and was really lucky to have a really eclectic program where we were learning about developmental approaches to early childhood education and ways to really center the dignity of children, and through that sort of fell backwards into public Montessori and was really thrilled to have found this science-driven pedagogy that's inherently child-centered, it's differentiated, it's developmental, and the rest is history. I was a Montessori guide, instructional coach, director of a MACD accredited training center, and now an Embracing Equity senior director of learning. And I'm here today because I'm committed to working alongside educators just like you in reimagining schools as welcoming and affirming environments that honor the dignity and potential of all children.
Awesome. Thank you, Carly. Isaiah, do you want to speak to this question?
Peace, peace, peace. Can you all hear me all right?
Yes.
All right. I apologize that my video is off. That's for all the men that have oppressed the sisters. So I got to be off camera because of that. Maybe I don't know. I take one.
Maybe that's embracing equity here.
So I'll take one for the team. So Aize Sabater, Executive Director, AMI USA. I'm co-founder of the BMEF, the Black Montessori Education Fund. Glad to be with you all today. So I was initially attracted to Montessori because my college roommate, who at this time, one of the, Harvard of the Black Harvard of the South, he was the class valedictorian. So he's like the smartest cat of the smart cats. And he was a Montessori child. And I was like, man, if Montessori helped this cat to be like this, man, that's the way to go. So when we graduated in May from Morehouse. September, we opened up a independent Black school, and it was Montessori inspired because neither one of us were Montessori trained. So it was Montessori inspired because of his, just brilliance. And then fast forward to, getting married to a beautiful woman who was a Montessorian, and our children went to a Montessori school. And I was blown away once I did the open house and saw what my child was doing. I was like, oh man, I'm drinking the Kool-Aid now. And so we then later had an opportunity to open up a school, and there was no other way to go but Montessori. And so we helped to open up a Montessori public charter school in DC because of the power that I saw and experienced with my child with my own eyes.
Yeah, that's powerful. Thank you, Aize. I know as a new parent to a new Montessori student, it was really interesting because I had always, as a Montessori teacher, I knew I wanted my kid to go to a Montessori school. And yet when I was looking for a Montessori program that truly embraced equity as the plate, as the whole purpose of education for nurturing, right, that humanity. It was very difficult to find a Montessori school that had a organizational commitment to DEI, and especially to anti-racism education with any sort of success metrics or accountability. And so I'm left wondering, does Montessori mean you are anti-racist? Like, how can Montessori schools opt out of DEI and still call themselves Montessori?
Great question. I think, honestly, I think that's we talk about this at large. Well, a lot of people do. That's one of the myths of Montessori, is that peace education is there and available, and so therefore, check, right? We've been having this conversation at Embracing Equity about chequity, right?
Yeah.
Okay, it's done. It's in there, and so the push for me is, and people say, oh, it's in there also because we focus on the individual child, right? But are we going deep enough? Are we saying this Black child, this brown child, this Asian child, and what is it that they need in terms of culture? What is it that they need in terms of mirror and window, right? Do they see themselves in this classroom? People also say that, oh, Montessori is so wonderful because we honor cultures, we talk about different cultures, but are we talking about the cultures, the ways of the very children sitting in our Montessori classrooms? I'll kind of start there and and lean to my co-panelists to say what you're thinking about it. Carly, your thoughts?
Yeah, so thinking about, that this idea that anti-racism is inherent in the Montessori practice, I don't think is true. But I also think that we got to think about the ways in which we can make it so, which is an unflinching commitment to the theoretical and practical work of anti-racism and liberatory experiences.
Yes.
And this starts first with the adult, right? If we imagine the Montessori pedagogy as the vehicle, who's driving that vehicle? And work has been done to build your own critical consciousness, to sharpen your race analysis and intersectional analysis so that you can truly show up in authentic ways for every child in your classroom and every family that's a part of your organization.
Love that. Yeah.
Corin, do you want to add to that?
I'm like, can you hear me?
Yeah, it looks like your wheels are spinning.
Yeah, my wheels are spinning because I'm like, how can we? Authentic Montessori requires that we do our spiritual preparation. It requires, if you think about just what Maria Montessori says, now what makes a teacher is love for the human child, for it's that love that transforms the social duty of the educator into higher consciousness, into a mission. Right? That we have to rid ourselves. There's another quote she talks about ridding ourselves of our pedagogical prejudices. I'm wondering who's actually doing this. Right? I think there's a lot of Montessori's that are thinking that they're doing Montessori. Right? If we are supposed to be, this was created in a time very similar to the time we're in now, through the pandemic, where it was just like, what's happening to humanity? right? What's happening to the people? Like what institutions are there on the ground that are actually going to help us save children, save our climate, right? Right now we're having earthquakes and fires. I mean, there was similar social destruction, natural destruction. What's happening to our connection to ourselves, to each other, to the environment, right? So we have an incredible opportunity with Montessori, but I think people are scared.
Yeah. And it often
talk about that more, but go ahead.
Right. And that fear, and the love of comfort, right?
Yeah.
It's comfortable to talk about peace.
Mm-hmm.
Who's against peace? Everyone's for peace, right? But being anti-racist, to oppose racism, you have to be willing to confront some of these ugly truths of the origin of this country, of how systems of power have been designed to perpetuate inequitable outcomes, even without individual players.
Yes.
And so at that point, how do we engage in this? Oh, that's the warning we told you about. We can think of it as a practice to be more connected here too. But no emergency. It's just a test. We want to be able to push Montessori out of an act of love, right, to be the powerful tool in dismantling these oppressive systems and fostering a more equitable education. What are some ways that you all are seeing this happening in practice? This series is Real Talk, Real Action. What are some of those actions that are happening in your communities that you're witnessing as concrete pathways to make this a reality?
Daisy, can I jump in just for a moment?
Please, yeah.
To the previous question. So I would say that there is an emergency. When you see what's happening with our children, there is an emergency. When you look across the country, I mean, literally at my alma mater, there was a shooting just last night. In fact, I'm texting my son because he's there at Morgan State University, because there's a shooting that happened right now. And we talk about, who's against peace, but in our names, I would dare say that we are against peace. How are we going to go ahead and talk about, what about the investment in early childhood education with the Build Back Better bill that did not pass, while at the same time we're coughing up tens of billions of dollars to send to the war in Ukraine? So we're not putting money in to help our babies out, but we can, within a blink of an eye, pass tens of billions to go ahead and fight a war in Ukraine. So people talk about peace, but we're not really about peace, because we see war all around us. And so I would dare say too many of us be faking the funk. And so, for me, the difficulty is because Montessori as a term has not been, there's not a copyright. And so you have people doing Mana somethings and Mana whatever. And in the name of Montessori, when they faking a funk also. And so that's how you can have people, again, you have at the height of what they would call the so-called period of, civil rights, you had folk coming out of church talking about, they love the Lord, going to lynch people right after that. And so again, people will say they're for one thing, but their actions will scream louder than their words. And so again, you have many who claim the term Montessori, but they're not really about Montessori. And so I would dare say that is an issue that we have.
Yes, absolutely. And so what are the ways in which authentic, practice of this philosophy is happening? Are there accountability measures that we can look to, or examples?
I would say yes. I would say that everybody needs to embrace equity. And what does that mean, right? Because you hear people say, someone kind of pushed my thinking yesterday, because they say, what I hear people say, that we all need to do the work. what is the work? And I think that's what you're asking us, Daisy.
Right.
What is the work, right? And so for me, the work is what embracing equity talks about is an ecosystem. It's individual, interpersonal, institutional. It's all three. You cannot just do individual, right? You cannot just do interpersonal. Let's do book studies. There's nothing wrong with book studies to raise your awareness. That's a start, but that cannot be your stopping place, right? What institutional, because we're talking about the Montessori and the institution of Montessori, right? What is that? So, yes, we have to turn the mirror on ourselves first. We have to say, who am I within this society, within the ways in which I've been socialized, so that I can begin to disrupt my biases, my internalized racism, particularly as a person of color. I've got to start here to break that down, because I can't, otherwise it'll be what people sometimes ask for. Can't y'all just put together a Montessori album?
Yeah,
And teach me how to do this album with the children, right? It'll be that, and that's not enough. It's actually, it's not your starting place, right? I'm seeing in the comments, people are saying, yes, the staff and the children. I like that order. Leadership, staff, children. It's not that we once we change ourselves, it's going to happen with the children. We've got to do some work here first, and then interpersonally, and then institutionally. We've got to use that ecosystem approach. For me, one of the programs that I lead with Embracing Equity is the leadership residency. I work with those nationwide leaders to say, you are the decision makers. Some of you all hold the purse strings, because that's what teachers are saying. We have teachers in the classroom who are on fire. They are ready, and they hit a glass ceiling when they go to their administrators, when they go to their boards and say, I want to do this. I want to bring this learning in. I want to learn more. I want to, wait for it, transform.
That's it. That's it. And that is honestly the hardest work. This is why we're talking about, right, what it means to have critical consciousness, what it means to have a liberatory, transformative consciousness, because you can get the leaders, but they are also within an ecosystem. They're also within a culture that has a fear. There's so much fear embedded in our culture, fear of transformation, fear of losing power. So we have fear of losing our lives, seeing my Black, brown, and people on the front line, our children, sending my son out is this fear within my body. But then you also have white people, privileged people who are afraid of mourning the loss of their power. And so what happens then? Because just like the embryo of the liberatory embryo needs to be there for the child, it also needs to be there for the leaders, right? So what does it mean to actually create a liberatory zone? This is where we get like way back in times where we knew, right, from slavery, we knew it was hostile. We created these liberatory zones. We even have some here in Oakland. This is what I'm looking at. Like, how can we actually practice our freedom with the recognition that the children need to be educating in a way that allows them to know how to change and transform? Educate for, reflect on yourself, know your identity, but know how to change. Have those muscles of critical consciousness where you can do that and you can feel okay. You've exercised what it means to go into the abyss, to grieve, to transform, because that's what they're doing. Children are doing naturally every single day. But when they see adults and they see leaders holding on, they don't know what to do. Yeah. So that's what I'm doing practically, is creating these liberatory zones for within schools, all through Know Thyself, all across the nation, working with the teacher, working with the culture, working with with the leaders, working with the children to figure out how do we create this autonomy so that we can fake it till we make it, right? This is how we were able to move through some of the most harsh, oppressive conditions. And we're like frogs in it, boiling in a tank right now. We don't even realize how oppressive it is. Just turn the heat up, just turn the heat up, just turn the heat up, right? Wake up and recognize and practice your freedom. Teach the children how to transform. I'll leave it at that and pass it on to
it's powerful.
Come on, we said real talk. This is real talk.
Real talk.
We came for real talk.
Carly or Aize.
Mama would say ladies first, please, Carly.
So, Corin, you said that something about white folks being afraid to lose power. I also think it's like a fear of loss of identity and not knowing where you belong in this movement. And I think a lot about Fannie Lou Hamer, who said, none of us are free until all of us are free, which means that every single one of us has a role in the movement for racial and social justice, regardless of our melanin. They may be very different lanes, right? But we all have a role. We all belong in this. I think there's a lot of fear around where do I belong? I feel pushed out. I don't feel like I'm at the center anymore, which feels like marginalization if you've always been at the center. And I think the other part of this is finding people, role models that we can look towards. I'm going to speak to the white people here around finding the abolitionists and the co-conspirators and the white folks who have been a part of every movement for racial and social justice that we can look towards to emulate as well. We belong. And when we are afraid of not belonging, then we go find other radicalized groups that give us toxic belonging. And that's why we see things like the march up on the Capitol and things like the Charlottesville disasters, all that kind of stuff. Like, we're going to find belonging in bad places unless we see ourselves belonging to this movement that is collective and is multicultural and is a coalition across race and identity.
Absolutely. Right. And a movement that is not about perfection, right? A movement that is being able to make mistakes as we learn. That's how we learn. It's very much, that's why we call ourselves like a Montessori for adults program, because we believe in the ways in which Montessori education teaches children. We also need that as adults. We need these liberatory zones, these brave learning spaces for us to heal from some of the wounding we may have experienced firsthand from schooling, but also to then manifest our wildest freedom dreams and what is actually possible.
Right. So I following what Carly just said, so I would definitely encourage folk to look to, the example that Brother John Brown set for many, not taking any prisoners. And I agree with what Dr. Evans said. We need to work on changing ourselves. In fact, this is a quote from Dr. Montessori, who said in Education and Peace, war will end only when humanity undergoes a spiritual reconstruction. And so she's talking about, war is not the issue. The issue is the spiritual preparation of each individual. And so what are we doing to transform ourselves? So, for myself as an individual trying to work on the individual level, not only working on myself, which is a continual process, and that's, my spiritual tradition, but also working with the BMEF, for example, to help give access to more Black individuals to be able to get into Montessori, whether they want to get in as a Montessori teacher, whether they want to get their children in Montessori programs, whether they want to go ahead and start Montessori programs. And then on the organizational level, trying to work with AMI USA to lean into JEDI. And so again, we have a change consultant that's going to schools to help them to work on leaning into JEDI and JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And, and again, myself taking heat for leaning into JEDI for as long as we have, particularly when you look around the nation and you see folk downsizing DEI consultants, and they're, cutting people loose from the DEI positions because folk were faking it. And so again, on myself working on the organizational level, working with schools who are interested in leaning into change on the school level, and then on the systems level, trying to work with AMI USA to lean into how we can transform to do better, because now we know better.
Absolutely. And I mean, your leadership as executive director, the first Black executive director of AMI USA, is such a milestone in what's possible, right? With the increased representation in leadership roles, in leadership positions, and actually working to change the systems and structures that Montessori institutions operate within. I'm also seeing that, you know, within Montessori, even though all 5 of us have chosen Montessori pedagogy, because we do see that it aligns to our values in social justice and anti-racist education, there are many of us, even on this panel and in the audience, who are disillusioned with the many ways in which Montessori institutions and the movement has failed to respond to this emergency state, has failed to take a concrete action in an integrated DEI strategy throughout the organization. And so I'm wondering, you know, for those of us who are still here, working in partnership with Montessori schools, Montessori institutions, Montessori teacher training programs, how can we address some of these failures? You know, that disillusionment with the possibility of Montessori that has now led to an exodus of many of the people who I started with at Montessori for Social Justice are not in the Montessori sector at all. How do we then address that? And also, Aize, to your point with the recruitment, attract a new generation of Montessori educators who see these values at work.
Daisy, was that directed to me or just to the panel?
No, in general. I know it's a big question. I want to grapple with it together. Because these failures show up in microaggressions, right? It shows up in ways that are dismissive, defensive, white fragility. There are some very typical obstacles that we have faced. I see it even in the comments here, where people are trying to advocate for this change. And, you know, it's not possible to do alone. We do need a community. That's what Embracing Equity represents, is this collective cross-racial coalition for justice. How do we work together to make sure we can address those micro and macro aggressions that are happening in the Montessori movement?
I think one of the things I always think about in terms of activism and advocacy is the community aspect. Movements for racial and social justice cannot be done alone. They must be done with our people, and they're strategic. It's not just people being reactive. You know, it wasn't, for example, Rosa Parks being tired on a bus one day. There was an entire strategy built around a more than a year-long bus boycott in the city of Montgomery. So I think the recommendation here is finding your people and building a groundswell that is speaking truth to power. And it's brought this quote up as we were preparing for this panel, and it just spoke to me the moment, Daisy, you asked me to come and speak. And it's from James Baldwin, who says, "I love America more than any other country in the world. And exactly for this reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually." And I feel that way about anything that we love. For example, Montessori, right? We got to speak a little bit of truth to power to the powers that be, the institutions that are part of this pedagogical model. So so that community piece, finding your people, speaking up, and then this is a call out to anybody who holds power and leadership in this space to listen, to see it as a call that is compassionately accountable rather than something to make us immediately defensive.
Yes. And I, you know, to piggyback on that, I'm looking at some of the comments where, you know, Jimmy says to us, it's difficult for people to discuss and clarify their values when they use the values of Montessori to hide behind when the conversation gets hot, right?
Ooh.
Yeah, I look at it when Amelia says, yeah, when a body of Montessori decides to go to a state that is racist. And Ruthie gives us something to think about, saying not everyone is hella racist, right? So, but please, Embracing Equity has actually, made a decision not to attend this year, but and you can read more about our stance on that. But I think, to what Daisy said, it's building what we call the coalition of the willing. We start
Mhm.
with us, the folks who are willing, who are ready to disrupt, who are ready to make hard, difficult stances, and who's saying, listen, this is where we start. And we turn this moment into a movement, sustainable, long lasting, keep going. There will be times on the journey where we need to sit and take a rest, but we can't stop the journey until racism is dismantled.
Right. Exactly.
So
Yeah. And
this is the thing. This is the thing. We got to do it together. This is the first thing, right? This is the principle. We know we have to collaborate. We have to stay connected to the environment. Our environment is racist. How are we going to weed those seeds of racism, right? How are we going to recognize, number one, that we all have biases? Embrace your biases. Look at them. It's a part of who you are. Sometimes it allows you to navigate, right? To prioritize, to keep yourself safe. It's the fact that these biases, when they contact the racist ground, they metastasize, right? That's what's actually happening.
right.
So we have to understand where Montessori fits in all of this, because Montessori herself, as my friend Oicha would say, was not a Montessorian, nor was Christ a Christian, right? So when we're weeding these seeds, we're recognizing that we have some politicians in the mix that are calling themselves Montessori guides, that are here to keep up the status quo. Call yourself out. Look at your own cosmic task, because
Yeah.
what the children are going to be doing is real. They're at developmental stages of liberation right now, where if they're 0 to 3, they're absorbing it all, right? If they're in that second phase of development, they're imagining the future. And if you're standing in front of them with a shadow on you, not recognizing, not feeding that imagination for a better world, what are you doing? You're harming the child. You're harming humanity.
Yes.
I don't support
Right.
crimes against humanity. Let's weed those seeds. Let's create a true liberatory zone in our schools.
Mm-hmm.
And Montessori is the place to do it. It's the place to do it. Go ahead, Dr. Aize.
No. Please finish, Dr. Evans, please.
Go ahead. No, I'm saying amen.
Amen.
Go ahead.
So I would say, yes, I would recognize that in many respects that Montessori practitioners have failed. And that's the thing. We have to realize that what's in the practice, right? It's what we are doing individually, because again, when we talk of Montessori as if it's, the giant in the sky that's going to come down from the hills to save us. No, Montessori is you, I, what we are doing every day with our children, with our schools, with the community that we're working with. This Montessori piece, we have to live into it. But when you look across the aisle at what education writ large is doing across the country, Mama would say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Education writ large across the country is broke and needs fixing. I just literally heard talk about somebody, saying 6% of the not 66% of the children out of Chicago public schools are going to college. And then when you talk about performance, I was looking at my friend asked me to help with this effort to start a program in Cleveland. I looked at the indices in Cleveland for algebra, language, science. All of them were under 10%, proficiency on all of the indices. And in fact, on algebra, it said that less than 1% of the high school children were proficient for algebra on their level. And so again, education across the country is failing our children. I do see a hope in Montessori. And again, for me, I experienced firsthand with my child how my child was excited about learning. Whereas I see many other children, they running from the schools like, no, I don't want to go back to school. My child was excited about learning because they were allowed the independence and to self-initiate the things that he was interested in. He was put in the driver's seat of his learning process and excited about learning. So again, so if we failed many times, is what we are doing. So again, we are the ones that we've been waiting for. So how are we working with Montessorians in our environment to lean into Jedi? How are we working with the Montessorians in our environment to lean into making sure that parents have power and they're working with this educational process alongside with the schools? And so again, we have to make sure that we're leaning into it every day and what we are doing, because we are the ones that we've been waiting for.
We are. And real quick, just to add on to that, remember what I said earlier, it's too big to do alone. And that's what we're talking about. And one of the things that we do at Embracing Equity is equity-centered coaching. We coach with you. We walk side by side, shoulder to shoulder with you in saying, what is your problem of practice and how can we look at it in an equity-centered way?
Yeah. And that's not Montessori specific, right?
Yeah.
The reason why I wanted to anchor this first episode in Montessori education is because it is common ground where we do share a lot of these values, and all of us see the possibility of this work in the Montessori pedagogy.
Yes.
But it's certainly not limited to Montessori. We partner with public school districts, higher ed teacher training institutions, even ed adjacent, ed tech companies, ed foundations,
Yes.
to be able to do this work, because anywhere there are people, this work is necessary. We simply believe that Montessori is a no-brainer entry point where we should be able to actively move the needle, given so much of this common ground and common values. But I do want to ask this last question around how, given the balance of possibility, but also the limitations we've experienced, what needs to change in the Montessori movement for it to be relevant? Because let's be honest, if we're looking at the U.S. education system, Montessori, public, charter, independent, combined makes up less than 3% of our education system in the United States. So what in the movement, right, and of this brand, frankly, the Montessori brand that is historically very white and very elitist, what needs to change in order for that movement to be relevant and effective for this shared vision of education that serves and honors all children?
I'll just say that, like, in response to that, and Dr. Aze, we are, unfortunately, the educational system is actually doing exactly what it's designed to do.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
I would argue that it's not broken. It's actually doing what it's designed to do. And I would say, check out Bettina Love's book, put it in the chat, where you can find out exactly, historically, blow by blow, moment by moment, how it's designed for this. So to decenter our humanity, to create cogs within the system of capitalism, to create people who don't necessarily think. These people who are running for their schools are intelligent because they're running for their lives. They understand that those school systems are crime scenes. So that's their self-preservation. So we look at Montessori, and thankfully your children had a chance to be there. Some of my children had a chance to be there. You know, that means that you actually had a space, hopefully not all of them, right, where the child can have their humanity centered and nurtured, right? And so Once we get the politicians, weed those seeds out of Montessori, then we can begin to go, okay, now this is a model for how we can actually reconstruct society. We can move from what Nicole says, we're talking about that ideology to the interpersonal, to the individual, right, to the institutional. That's when we can make those ripple changes that we want to see in the movement and in the world. It can be a model, but there's got to be the work done first.
Yeah, definitely. Carly, you have some thoughts?
Well, thinking about what to do next, I think about our own identity development and think about, what are us adults working towards when we're thinking about working towards liberation and transformation. We at Embracing Equity really love this quote from Adrienne Marie Brown, who talks about social justice work or racial justice work as science fiction, because we're working towards a reality that we have not ever lived yet together. But I argue that we can build pockets of that, right? We can build culture that is outside of white supremacy. We can divest from white supremacy culture in the spaces in which we are finding ourselves together with other adults, with our families, with our communities, inside of our classrooms and with our children, so that we can actually feel what it feels somatically in an embodied way to live in a liberatory space. Speaking back to what you were saying, Corinne, about these liberatory zones, I love that idea of like feeling what it is that we are working towards with our children.
Yes, that's what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
Right. In this conversation. Exactly. And we wanted it to be a free webinar series so that everybody could be part of this, this work and experience it for themselves, have these opportunities, not just once a year, maybe at a conference or an event, but in ongoing community, ongoing real talk and real actions. Isaac, do you want to add anything?
Just, again, thank you so much, Daisy, for your graciousness and allowing, passing the mic to a brother. I appreciate it, no doubt. To the rest of my co-panelists, the luminaries who are here, I'm, blessed to be with you all. Again, I will pour a virtual libation to my brother, Jamil Abdul Alameen, who this is his born day. And if you know the history of SNCC and of activism, H. Rap Brown or Jamil Abdul Alameen, who I interviewed when I was a student there in the West End at Morehouse for my, thesis project. And he's a political prisoner. And so, we say free them all to all the political prisoners who gave, their life that we might live better. And so again, for me, the liberatory journey is this educational route. I've been in education for more than 30 years. And so again, when I hear an educator talking about holistically educating not only the mind, not only the hand, but also the spirit. Dr. Montessori talks again and again about the spiritual embryo. And in fact, this is, I just finished reading Education of Peace. So I got quotes all day from her. So here's what she said. She said, liberation is extremely important because the child who is free is able to be cured of all of one's psychic deformities and become a master of oneself. So there she's talking about knowledge of self. There you go, Mama Corinne. She's talking about, us spiritually regenerating ourselves. And so again, for me as a liberation activist, this Montessori walk is my way of trying to advance my community. And so again, I appreciate each of you, and let us continue to press toward the mark, onwards ever.
Yes. And Aize, thank you for in your leadership at AMI USA, modeling what that kind of collaboration with integrity really looks like. Embracing Equity is partnering with AMI USA at the upcoming February 2024 refresher to offer an in-person workshop on Friday. And if you register now using Early Bird 10, we're giving 10% off to the first 25 tickets. And that's the opportunity to really come together in person and engage in an immersive learning experience that is everything we've talked about today, building, co-creating these liberatory zones, learning by doing, building our skills, and really supporting each other through this work. So highly encourage anyone who's able to join us for that in-person offering to join us. And as we reimagine Montessori education as a force for positive change, I hope that this conversation really helps to further challenge the status quo and empower all of us to create a more just and equitable educational landscape for all the people, the adults and the children. So thank you so much for being here. And if you can please drop in the chat any questions you want us to dive into in the future. This is a series, so we really want it to be a truth-telling series that goes deep into the tough questions that we are grappling with as a collective. We want to source that from you directly. If you have ideas on areas that we can explore together, we can learn together, and then times and dates that work well for everyone. We want to make this an open, welcoming space where everyone can come together and experience this real talk, real action in real time. Thank you all so much. Good to see you. We'll catch you at the next one. Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Panel.
Thanks.
Thank you all.